Hello and welcome back to another game dev video. Today I'm going to be discussing some tips that I've picked up over the past 2.5 years of making games, with my first commercial game releasing last month. I've also taken part in over 14 game jams, either by myself or in a team. With that said, straight into tip number 1. My first tip is about what game you make first, which is that you shouldn't start your dream game straight away. A lot of people might get into game development because they've had an idea for a game in their head that's been building up, which is great, but what I would say is while you're learning, put that idea to one side, because if you try to tackle your dream game straight away, it can be quite discouraging if things don't go right, because when you're learning, of course loads of problems come up. So what I would recommend doing, instead of going straight into your most complex idea that you've been working on for the longest, actually maybe what you should be doing is making lots of tiny little small projects or taking part in game jams. So this would be my tip number 2. By working on all of these smaller projects, you can gain an understanding of how you would create most features for whatever game you want to work on next. I'd recommend creating a new project for every feature or every part of a game that you want to try and work on or see if you can recreate. So that way you can decide, well, maybe I want to make a combat system or a health bar system, and that way you're not tempted to making a full game, but you are gaining an understanding and building up that knowledge of how you would tackle those systems in a bigger game scenario. For example, if you've still got that dream game idea, you now know how to tackle that. And as you can see here, I've got quite a lot built up, and this is only on one drive. Believe me, I went through a phase where I was probably clicking new project every day and just making a tiny feature each time. My next tip is about selecting the right kind of game project for you to make. You've got to ask yourself, will this be something that I'm interested in working on in a year's time? Now that's not to say that over the course of that year your game idea can't change, because actually adding new features into your game can actually break up your workflow and make it more diverse as well, actually making the game more diverse for your players. But just think, is this something I'll be motivated to work on in a year? And if you say yes to that, then that's probably the game idea for you. For a smaller project, this still kind of applies, because you never know actually how long the project will go on for. Also, if you're enjoying the background gameplay of Anchor Up, there's a link in the description. It's 40% off as of the time of recording for 1 week. Sorry for breaking off from the tips, back to them now. My next tip is kind of roughly about scheduling. Now, what I'd recommend doing is trying to find a time of the day or the week that works best for you to work on the game, but the main point that I would make is try and keep consistent with that. That helps you kind of see your progress, it kind of helps you see when your game might be released, and overall it can just help with motivation that you know that you've got that time in the week, or time of the day, or whenever it is, to work on your game. Secondary to that, don't feel bad about having a break from your project. That's quite healthy and can actually help you with motivation for when you get back to your project afterwards. My next tip is about game art, and that's that prototype art doesn't work for everyone, at least for me personally. I really liked having what looked like a finished product quite early on in development, because it kept me motivated. It's like, oh, I can see what this would look like at the end and what it'll be shipped as. That works for game jams too. That was a game jam project where actually graphics was one of the first things I worked on, but then again, that's just for me. I like having a finished product to look at while I'm working on the game. My next tip is about handling code frustration, which is something that every game developer or programmer will have to deal with. There was especially one time when I was making Anchor Up where it was actually that it wasn't building properly and I had to do something with the files of Unity. Take a break, go away from it for a while, take your mind off of it, and when you come back at it, it'll be so much easier to find a solution because you're not, like, in the heat of the moment frustrated. My next tip is about listening to feedback but also trying to preempt it. What this means is that, say if you've done a game jam and you get lots of feedback about something being unclear, not only will you try and make that thing clearer in your next game, but also play the game as the reviewer and think, what would I complain about, and then try and fix that. My next tip is that if you are planning a bigger game, then get your store page up early. What this means is that people can start to build interest in the game, and people can start to wishlist if it's on Steam, or if it's on itch.io, people can still follow you and they can see whatever post you're making about the game. This just builds up interest, and the earlier you can start this process, the more time people can actually start to look at the game and get to know it, so that way it's building up for the launch. Anyway, thank you very much for watching today's video. I hope you found these tips helpful in some way. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.